agenda. We have 82 members of Congress that have already endorsed the Thrive resolution as original co-sponsors, and this morning we released a new poll finding a strong majority of the public support Thrive nationwide. Thrive is a unifying roadmap that meets this moment by creating nearly 16 million good jobs, reviving our economy, and addressing the interlocking crises of climate change, racial injustice, public health, and economic inequity. The Thrive agenda is powered by activists and advocates nationwide and is supported by a wide array of organizations, including the American Federation of Teachers, the Center for American Progress, Church World Service, Climate Justice Alliance, Color of Change, Communication Workers of America, Green New Deal Network, Indigenous Environmental Network, League of Conservation Voters, the Movement for Black Lives, People's Action, SEIU, Service Employees International Union, Sierra Club, Sunrise Movement, United We Dream, and over 150 other advocacy groups. I am going to pass the mic this morning over to Congresswoman Debra Haaland to kick us off, and then I know that Leader Schumer and Senator Markey have to go take votes, so we're going to go ahead and do our sponsor speakers first. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, and thank you for joining us today. I'll start by stating the obvious. Vast economic, racial, and environmental injustice that has been the status quo in our country is wrong. Our country is facing a slew of crises that are all intertwined. Tens of millions of people are unemployed. The COVID-19 pandemic is still raging on. Racial and economic injustice are getting worse, and the climate crisis is accelerating every single day. This pandemic has put a spotlight on what happens in an economy that doesn't value our workers, that doesn't invest in our future, that doesn't care about our earth, and that doesn't lift people up. As we look at how we're going to recover from these many crises, we must answer the question: are we going to continue the status quo, which we know is not working for too many in our country, or are we going to build a future where every community can thrive? Today, we carve out a path for bold economic renewal, a path in which everyone has the opportunity to thrive. It's an honor to have so much support for this resolution from members both in the House and the Senate, and a very genuine and heartfelt thank you to Senators Markey and Schumer, Leader Schumer, for partnering with me on this effort. And thanks to all the grassroots advocates, both those here today and the many others who are pushing it forward. We're here today to announce the introduction of an agenda to transform, heal, and renew by investing in a vibrant economy, an agenda to thrive. The Thrive Agenda offers a framework of how we can build consensus around the recovery we so urgently need by centering racial, indigenous, climate, and economic justice from the outset as central pillars of the work to come. Now I'll turn the mic over to a champion for working families and the Senate powerhouse leader, Chuck Schumer.
Great. Well, thank you, Deb, and thank you and my dear friend Senator Markey and the rest of our Democratic colleagues who are part of a large coalition of Senate and House Democrats who, even if they can't be with us here today, support this great, wonderful, and necessary Thrive agenda. I also want to thank all of our speakers for participating in the videos shown today, and everyone from the grassroots and advocacy organizations who have come together to make this possible and have been pushing for meaningful change that is so needed on our planet. This is the force for the future. Climate advocates, labor unions, and those focused on addressing racial and economic justice coming together as one under Thrive. We are experiencing a collision of crises. The COVID pandemic, the effects of climate change, racial and economic injustices have led to the greatest health crisis we've seen in 100 years, the greatest economic crisis we've seen in 75 years. And we can't play whack-a-mole with these crises. We can't pick one alone to focus on, and that's the beauty of Thrive. It brings it all together. We must pursue a bold, just, visionary, and comprehensive plan of action that rebuilds our economy in a way that delivers for those most vulnerable and those communities who have been marginalized for far too long. The proof of the urgency of this situation is literally in the air around us. Right now, wildfires are rampaging across the West, across an area the size of the entire state of Connecticut, polluting the lungs of countless Americans. If anyone needed any proof of how disastrously and quickly climate change is affecting our globe, look out west. Mary Annaeus Heglar once said, "I don't need a time machine to see climate change. All I need is a window." Right now, millions of Americans are witnessing climate change in the ash and orange skies outside their windows. These catastrophic events have instigated and exacerbated climate change, and they're not new, nor is the upheaval that they cause that disproportionately affects the most vulnerable of communities. And yet, President Trump and almost all congressional Republicans still call climate change a hoax or something like that. Worse yet, Trump and the GOP pour gasoline on the fire by recklessly ripping apart vital environmental regulatory protections and recklessly pursuing more, not less, fossil fuel consumption production. As the number of coronavirus cases continues to grow, more Americans are dying, families face evictions, businesses are at risk of closing, and more workers are forced to go on unemployment. And yet Republicans are still proposing a totally inadequate plan, one that would actually take us backward. Well, Democrats will not let this happen. We recognize the gravity of the situation, and that's why I'm proud to support the ambitious long-term solutions outlined today that match the scale of our problems as well as the urgency to act now. The Thrive Agenda calls for an economic renewal plan that not only puts millions of Americans back to work, but creates good-paying jobs in a vibrant, clean economy that will rebuild our economy so that it works for everyone, not just those at the top. We can't solve the climate crisis by relying on the same methods that fueled it in the first place, a system that prioritizes corporate polluters instead of workers and exposes the most vulnerable to the most pollution. We have to start by investing in poor urban and rural communities, minority communities, black, brown, indigenous communities who have been impacted by the systematic injustices for far too long. We have to do so by supporting job creation, just transitions that help workers, pollution reduction, and climate resilience. This is essential to rebuilding our country in a more equitable and sustainable way. Now, we have tremendous support for this resolution from across the country. Labor unions, climate advocates, those focused on addressing racial injustice are all coming together. This is a pivotal time in our country's history. We can't wait for President Trump or congressional Republicans to come to their senses. So I make you this pledge. If God willing, I become majority leader next year, you can be sure we'll make it a top priority to pass a just, economic, renewable bill following the principles of Thrive to confront climate change, economic inequality, and racial justice. Even in the face of this global pandemic, we can and must develop solutions to the climate crisis that create good jobs, invest in our communities, and ensure healthy lives for everyone, regardless of zip code. Our response will shape our society for decades to come. This is how we make a more just society. It's at our fingertips. We have to grab it. And it's why we must lift each other's voices up and propose bold, forward-looking solutions to the most significant challenges that our country has ever faced. With that, I want to introduce someone who has been a great advocate, a great friend. We used to play basketball together when we were younger, but now we work, far more importantly, on effective and strong legislation together. The great Senator from Massachusetts, Eddie Markey. You want to drive? I want me to wait for you? I'll wait for you.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. Thank you to Deb. We've been working on the drafting of this for some time, and I think it has come together in a way that reflects the magnitude of the challenge which we have. Thank you, Kaya. Thank you to everyone who is here today. Chris Bergfault from the American Federation of Teachers, Sebastian Tayak from the Piscataway Nation Indigenous Environmental Network, Judith Howell from SEIU 32BJ, Maria Lopez Nunez from Ironbound Community Corporation, and Pastor Kip Bernard Banks, Senior Pastor of East Washington Heights Baptist Church. This is what essential looks like the people joining us here today, intersectional, intergenerational, interconnected. We thank you all for being here. And again, I thank again Congresswoman Haaland and to Chuck Schumer. We're grateful for their leadership. The post-virus economic recovery must be a just recovery, a fair recovery, a clean, green, renewable recovery. We just wrapped up the hottest decade ever recorded. The past 5 years have been the hottest 5 on record for the second year running. The young people here have never experienced a year when the current year wasn't hotter than the average, begging the question of what can we even say is average anymore. Unlike coronavirus, there will never be a vaccine for climate change. But that doesn't mean that we can't engage in the preventative care of our planet by putting in place the programs that are going to be essential to avoid the worst, most catastrophic consequences of climate change. We're charged in many ways by the fossil fuel industry with having socialist perspectives on this issue. Well, what do you call tax breaks for the oil, gas, and coal industry for 100 years? Just give us some of that. Socialism for wind and solar, all-electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, for battery storage technologies, for energy efficiency technologies, for the agriculture, industrial, commercial, and housing sectors in our country, and we will be looking at the fossil fuel industry in a rear view mirror of history. Once we change not the technology that we already have, but the politics of technology, so that we make it possible for that revolution to take place. And what do we have to do? We have to ensure that the outlines of this counteract racial and gender injustice, build the power of union workers, prevailing wage, and create millions of new jobs to help a stronger, safer, more just economy to be created after the coronavirus pandemic and beyond. We can save all of creation by engaging in massive job creation. We know that we can do this. And that's why when we drafted the Green New Deal, we ensured that we talked about indigenous communities. We talked about frontline communities. We talked about communities of color. We talked about all those communities that were left behind in the first New Deal. They were excluded in many of the programs, and we were intentional, we were deliberate, and that's what Thrive is. Thrive makes it very clear that we're not leaving behind any of those communities, that we are going to have an incredible economic revolution in this country that provides the jobs of the future while ensuring that we deal with the historic inequities. We know that black and brown families have always breathed different air than suburban white communities. We know that. And we can see it in the coronavirus pandemic, where those who already have pre-existing asthma conditions are more affected by coronavirus because they've already been near that pollution. We know this. We can see the injustice, and we can see who they are. They're black, they're brown, they're poor, they're immigrant communities. And the future has just walked in this room, and we are going to save the planet. We are going to make sure that planet is there, that is safe and clean, and that she will never know that there was such a vice-like grip that was held over our energy agenda in our country. So I cannot thank her as our most important guest today. from joining us, because all politics is about the future. The past is just a memory. The future is our hard reality for the poor, the sick, the elderly, but for the children, for those who are most affected by climate change. We must take action. That's what Thrive is all about, and I thank everyone who is here as part of this incredibly diverse coalition. And again, next year, as Senator Schumer said, with his leadership, we will have this agenda on the floor of the United States Senate, and we will be casting votes and making accountable those on the other side of history. So we thank.
Pass the bill, we want $1 a ton.
So we thank each and every one of you for being here today. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Let's go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, thank you to Dara. Oh, see, she waved. All right, thank you so much to our speakers. I now want to welcome Sebi Tayak up for representing the Indigenous Environmental Network and the Piscataway Nation here in this area. Thank you so much, Sebi.
Good afternoon. My name is Sebi Medina Tayak. I'm a member of the Piscataway Indian Nation, and I'm up here representing the Indigenous Environmental Network. I'm also a member of the International Indigenous Youth Council, which was formed during the resistance at Standing Rock against the Dakota Access Pipeline. I wanted to speak on broadly some of the commitments that the Thrive Agenda makes to our nation. It's extremely important that we center the pre-existing conditions that led to this culminating moment of crisis. Since April, the Indigenous Environmental Network joined with a few other organizations and companies to provide 140,000 PPEs to communities across Indian country. And the cross-cutting issues that Native communities were facing has led us to the very real stance that we just cannot go back to normal after this pandemic. Business as usual is not good enough, and it hasn't been enough for 400 years for Indigenous people of this continent. We need to build a world that is resilient to climate crisis, pandemic, and the ongoing upheavals across the globe. Part of that is building and reinforcing a strong economy and social program for all communities, especially those like our Indigenous communities that have been historically left out of the conversation. I wanted to thank the lawmakers here for standing with us as Indigenous people, the various working class communities, other people of color and frontline communities that have had the heaviest losses during this time. The Thrive Agenda, we can't deal with these things as individual issues. So a bold commitment that allows our people as Indigenous people and all peoples to rise up from the ashes of this crisis to a bold new future. Now is the time for that renewal, and wanted to just thank you again for centering and reinforcing the presence of Indigenous people in this agenda. Should I introduce Deb? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sebi, and for allowing us to be here on Piscataway land today. Next up is Pastor Kip Banks. Pastor Banks is the senior pastor at the East Washington Heights Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Reverend Kip.
Good afternoon. I am Kip Banks, pastor of the East Washington Heights Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and also a member of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, the church convention of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And on behalf of my church and the residents of Washington, D.C., and the Progressive National Baptist Convention, people that love God everywhere, I stand in support of the Thrive Agenda. In the book of Jeremiah, the 19th chapter, the 22nd verse, the prophet asked a question. The question he asked was, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? If there is a balm, then why is there no healing for my people? Jeremiah asked that question because of the sad, sick condition the children of Israel found themselves in. And it's a relevant question for us today as a nation because we find ourselves in a sad, sick condition. Orange skies over California. People where I am in Southeast Washington, D.C. who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. So many who can't afford to buy a house. And then we talk about the climate, and we know that when the rest of America gets a cold, Black America gets COVID-19. When America gets COVID-19, Black America catches HELL. The question that Jeremiah asked was a rhetorical question because there was a balm in Gilead, but they weren't applying the balm. And that question is relevant for us today because there is a balm in Gilead, and Thrive represents that balm. We have the resources that we need. We have the resources, but we must bring them all together and make the connection between climate and the economy and race. Dr. King said a long time ago that the three principal evils facing us today are racism, militarism, and poverty, and they all go together. And that's why Thrive is so needed, because it links the jobs with the racism, with the climate, and we need to have Thrive enacted. We need to have it enacted today. And so on behalf of my church and behalf of urban pastors all across this country, we urge the Congress to support Thrive, because there is a balm in Gilead, but we've got to work to enact it. Thank you.
Pastor. Thank you so much for those powerful words, Reverend Kip. I'm going to transition us to hear from some grassroots leaders from across the country via the videos right now. If we can cue those videos up. Thank you.
And here in New York City, in my home of Atlanta, Georgia, and in underserved communities across the nation, our people are locked in a cycle of hopelessness. Our families live in constant fear of eviction, fear they won't be able to feed themselves the next day, fear that their children and our future will be locked in the same struggle for generations to come. You see, the Thrive Act wouldn't just help save the environment, it would help break the chains of that cycle for millions across the nation. Unionized, high-paying, clean energy jobs would help bring opportunity to our people. That's what the Thrive Act symbolizes for me, empowerment. Empowerment for all oppressed communities here in America.
Michelle Martinez from the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. Right now, Michigan needs bold action on climate, a plan that's going to help us build the regenerative economy of the future. We have aging pipelines that are threatening the nation's most precious resource, the Great Lakes. We have residents with no access to clean water in their homes during the pandemic. We have some of the highest utility rates in the nation, and we have families that are sending their kids back to school with great uncertainty, while teachers also struggle to make ends meet. We want a kind of economy that's going to help us rebuild Michigan. When we come together and start to look to the future, Michigan should be the leader on the regenerative economy.
Hi, my name is Tamara Tozo-Laughlin, and I'm the North America Director at 350.org. I live in Baltimore, where I've seen my community face the compound crises of COVID-19, the climate crises, and economic and racial injustice. I witnessed firsthand how communities willingly work together to make change with what they have on hand, whether it's community gardens and mass food deserts, to protesting for clean air, Black lives, and to end toxic over-policing. The Thrive Agenda is an important step to a just recovery that prioritizes communities like mine. We endorse this resolution and demand Congress support the people and the Thrive Agenda and commit to working for a just recovery.
At the same time, the climate crisis has lit our country ablaze. My own Latinx community, like many others, has been engulfed by COVID-19 and rising poverty. Our communities are already at the edge as people of color, and we have been pushed over that edge into free fall. Bodies are hitting the floor. Thrive represents hope for my community, among many others.
Our next speaker is Judith Howell, a longtime civil rights activist who was part of the efforts to desegregate public schools. She's currently an elected board member of her union, 32BJ SEIU, and works as a security officer downtown Washington, D.C. She believes that working people can and must be part of the process of reversing climate change. Thank you so much, Judith.
Thank you for giving the first third of my speech for me, because that means I can cut to the chase. And the first thing I want to do before I even start my remarks on Thrive Agenda is to shout out the 30,000 brothers and sisters from my union who have been laid off because of COVID, the countless others who are working half hours and half shifts and trying to support families on half paychecks, the families of the 150 union members that we have lost already to COVID in 11 states that we represent. We have 175,000 members in 11 states. And I am here today because I'm gravely concerned about planet Earth. The fight for climate justice is critically important to me and my union. We believe that working people can and must be part of the process of reversing climate change. That's true. Because, in fact, those who have done the least to cause climate change, the working poor, people of color, and displaced immigrants, are disproportionately hurt the most and the least equipped to deal with it. These same communities are home to frontline workers who are getting sick and dying from COVID-19 at a higher rate than anyone else. And that's after they have risked their lives to keep others safe. Many are being laid off without paycheck or health care, whether they're in a union or not. 32BJ is a part of the People's Climate Movement. We are a longtime member of the Blue-Green Alliance, and we have an award-winning Green Supers training program. My union understands that without the ambitious goals under the Thrive Agenda, the political will not exist to force corporations to change their behavior. Big oil, big coal, and the gas frackers, their lobbyists, scare their workers into believing that change will ruin their livelihoods and take their jobs. Nothing can be further from the truth. We'll need energy, and you can retrain for the clean energy. McConnell and Trump have thrown essential workers off a financial cliff with only a shredded parachute. The greedy never care about the needy. This is why we must pass the Thrive Agenda, because it will defend us against their greed by addressing the interconnected crises of climate change, racial injustice, public health, and economic inequity. The best way to fight inequality is through the availability of family-sustaining jobs. And we know that worker unions are one of the ways, if not the only way, to accomplish this. That's why the Thrive Agenda not only creates jobs for millions of unemployed, retrains those who will be put out of the fossil fuel industry, but increases access to unions and punishes employers that try to intimidate and stop workers from exercising their constitutional right to organize. These clean energy jobs will be so good for Mother Earth. I proudly spoke in support of the Green New Deal here on the Hill last year. So I am pleased that the Thrive Agenda is in line with that vision and includes specific economic solutions to address today's new crises. You can pass all the legislation in the world, But if you don't put the money in place to create the programs and enforce the legislation, then you haven't done anything. We must remember what I learned in high school, what the scientist and author Rachel Carson told us in her book, The Silent Spring. We are challenged as humankind, and I'm quoting, we are challenged as humankind, has never been challenged before, to prove our maturity and our mastery, not of nature, but of ourselves. And that's why I, Judith Howell, on behalf of my union, 32PJ Service Employees International Union, I'm joining the growing call on Congress to have a conscience, vote for and pass the Thrive Agenda, and do it quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith, for those words. Next, I'm going to invite Chris Bergfalk up from the American Federation of Teachers. And I'm going to just actually get out of your way and let you speak so I don't give half of your remarks as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Bergfalk, fifth grade teacher at a DC public school, just over a mile away from where we stand here by our nation's capital, and a proud member of AFT and the Washington Teachers Union. For a number of years, the students that I've taught have included students from DC's family homeless shelter until it closed last year. So the majority of students I've taught have been at risk, many homeless. And this is my 17th year of teaching in the same city where I graduated from public schools. I never left but stayed to become a teacher and raise a family where all three of my children also attended our public schools. So I'm here as someone deeply committed to the people of this city, our children and families, and schools and communities. We live in a time of tremendous challenge, but as a teacher, I know those challenges hurt some more than others, especially those who are already struggling the most. We need an economic recovery that doesn't ignore the realities I see every day in the lives of the children I teach, where those hit hardest are also the last to recover. Those most in need cannot be an afterthought, where we hope recovery will eventually trickle down to them. No one wants to go back to school more than teachers. I hate distance learning. It hurts to constantly struggle to teach and reach children who are unhappy and wishing they were at school learning with their friends and families. For many of these students, schools are the safest and most stable places in their lives. During the shutdown, I asked students to complete a personal inventory, where they told me their favorite song, book, and what animal they would like to be and why. I got lots of great fun answers like lions, elephants, cats, and eagles. But one nine-year-old boy wrote that he would like to be a cheetah. I'm thinking, cheetah? Cheetahs are cool, like the Cheetos. He wants to be fast, the fastest in the school. But he wrote that he wanted to be a cheetah because cheetahs can escape from all the predators. We don't have safe, thriving communities for our children and families. Everybody knows about summer learning loss, where struggling, disadvantaged, high-needs students can lose a quarter of what they gained during the year in just a 2-month summer break. But here we are with learning loss that started in March, and now we are in September, still unsure if there is any end in sight. And for the kids most affected, distance learning isn't working well. Some education researchers are predicting lifelong impacts. The digital divide now has the same result as permanent expulsion from school, where students are completely removed, often led with frozen or dead screens, unheard voices, and silence. When I download my live class attendance list from our live meeting software, some students are able to log in for all 45 or 50 minutes of our live sessions. I can hear them crystal clear. But I knew some other students were struggling because their voices and cameras would freeze, and from time to time they would sound like a broken robot. It's hard to hear and understand them. The attendance log showed these students logged in and out 4, 5, 6, or more times, either because of their internet connection or the device. God bless those students for trying so hard to be in class and never giving up on trying over and over and over again. After teaching for 17 years, mostly in struggling Title I schools, I'm grateful for some success in closing the achievement gap. I've worked with so many students, bursting with potential, but burdened with challenges society can hardly begin to understand. Year after year, I've seen students that, when given the chance and tools, turn around academically. But individual successes don't solve systemic educational disparities, especially impact economically disadvantaged students of color. That's why I support Thrive, because only by investing in a vibrant economy can we experience the transformation, healing, and renewal which our schools need. The achievement gap is really an opportunity gap, which can only be closed by bold, innovative initiatives. We need to quit covering up the problems I see every day at school with Band-Aids and recognize the research showing that 80% of the factors limiting academic performance lie outside the school, with community and family issues. Thrive provides the holistic response we need to address an opportunity gap perpetuated by economic inequality and structural racial and social injustice. As a teacher, I always try to look at problems and challenges as learning experiences. And I really think this last year could be the biggest learning experience our country has had in my lifetime. We are starting to be honest to confront many of our core problems. You know, there's a disconnect between what I tell my students in school and the reality they experience when they walk out that door. I tell them that all they need to be successful are our core American values of hard work, decency, treating everyone with dignity and respect, truthfulness, and care for the environment. That nothing else matters. Not what you look like, not where you come from, and not who you know. I'm excited about Thrive because it can be that bridge that helps what teachers teach in school become the reality that children embrace when they walk out that door. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're going to hear from some more grassroots leaders from around the country by video now. Thank you, Robbie.
Hi, my name is Frank Salmon. I'm a Jane Place here in New Orleans, Louisiana. I support Thrive because we need safe and ethical jobs and infrastructure. Here in New Orleans, we know firsthand the dangerous and catastrophic effects of global climate change. After all, Hurricane Katrina was only 15 years ago. Support green jobs, support green infrastructure. Please support Thrive.
Hello, my name is Sandra Dennis, and I am with the Miami Workers Center in Miami, Florida. I'm here in the sanctity of my home, where hundreds of thousands of care workers take care of children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. It is critical that Congress supports the Thrive agenda so that we can continue to work while our loved ones are being taken care of, rather than most harm.
Hi, my name is Gabriella Kilpack, and I'm a UPS delivery driver out of Salt Lake City. And I strongly support the protection of unions and the further strengthening of our union rights. That's why I support the Thrive Resolution.
We are Mickey and Nina McCoy, and we're from Inez, Kentucky, and our backdrop explains a lot about our culture.
When my grandfather was a coal miner, a union coal miner back in the day, he told me a story about how John L. Lewis had called them out of the mines. He said, son, we all went out, we raised a garden, we harvested and canned to make sure our family could make it through the harder times.
And we've been fighting for clean, safe, affordable drinking water in our community. And we think that miners who are now out of work could be trained and repurposed to be able to do things like that. And with federal money like this, it could help those people be trained to make our community safe and a place where we could be proud to live.
My name is Maurice Mitchell, speaking to you from San Diego, California. And I was a Superstorm Sandy climate refugee. I saw firsthand how climate calamity could devastate our communities, especially Black, brown, working class, and immigrant communities, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the Thrive Agenda. The Thrive Agenda seeks to invest in Black and brown communities, the communities most devastated by climate calamity, invest in the resiliency in our communities, which is one of the reasons why my movement home, the Movement for Black Lives, and my political home, the Working Families Party, are enthusiastic supporters and endorsers of the Thrive Agenda.
And to put millions of people back to work, building on an economy that prioritizes climate, racial, and economic justices. Communities like the one I come from, Newark, New Jersey, specifically the Ironbound community, where we're overburdened with so many polluters in our community, we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table, right? We need to make sure that we're part of the decision-making process, that the Thrive Agenda helps us put people over profit, because that's what's important, right? Make sure that capitalism doesn't continue trickling down its negative consequences to the most vulnerable communities who don't necessarily benefit from them. 'Cause my community definitely doesn't benefit from the polluters in our community or in our neighborhood. To help us continue to expand and to collaborate with organizations like the New Jersey Environmental Commission. With their help, we were able to make policy changes, like passing the New Jersey Environmental Justice Bill S232, which helps ensure that the community is involved in a decision-making process whenever a new development enters our communities. The bill like S232 right now, it's helping the state of New Jersey to continue enforcing just policies that can provide a healthy, equitable, and regenerative community. The Thrive Agenda also, right now we're in a crisis, right? We're facing. The crises we're facing now have intersectional issues that need intersectional solutions. We need to follow the lead of the communities who are mostly affected by the climate crisis. It's us, right? We're affected by the climate crisis, racial injustices, and economic inequity. We appreciate, all the research that's done regarding our neighborhoods and all the pollutions, but we need to be able to be part of that seat to make those decisions. And I want to say that the Thrive Agenda does that. We can't fix the injustices in our communities without including those who live in unjust experiences, period. I'm happy that the new Green Deal is in line with that, right? But we need to deconstruct, right? Then reconstruct. We need to reconstruct with frontline communities at the table and make sure that we're never going back to normal, because normal is just not helping us, and it's not working. We're going to continue fighting and make sure that we create more regenerative communities. The Thrive Agenda is holistic, bold, and puts us in a state of constant critical thinking to tackle different intersections of issues presented to our most vulnerable communities. The Thrive Agenda invests in and expands the care economy and dignity for domestic workers caring for elderly, children, and people with disabilities across the country. And make sure that we're doing these solutions in a more forward-thinking way. We have a new window of opportunity to keep fighting for real change with a powerful coalition of grassroots groups who created the Thrive Agenda through decades of organizing for a more just, equitable economy and a more regenerative community. As a queer Afro-Latina, a community organizer, an urban farmer, a mentor, a Newark, New Jersey native, and a representative of my hood, of my community, I fully stand with the Thrive Agenda, along with my organization, Ironbound Community Corporation, in the hopes to transform, heal, and renew by investing in a vibrant economy. Thank you for your time.
We're ready now for the third video from our speakers from around the country. Thank you.
Ruth Shavak Isen Shibiji. My name is Ruth, and Shavak Isen is my Denina Athabascani. And here in my home of Alaska, we are living on the front line of the climate crisis. Last summer, as wildfires raged across our state, we watched our chika, our salmon, dying in our streams from heat stroke. Nothing is more critical to the survival of Alaska Native peoples than healthy landscapes that support all life. The Thrive Agenda moves us towards justice, sustainability, and right relationship with our earth. To me, the Thrive Agenda says, we are working as one.
I'm Caitlin Golly, and I'm an Iowa CCI member. Here from Purple Martin Lake in Iowa, I am working dead-end job to dead-end job trying to pay off my student debt when I could be living my passion and restoring native prairies just like this. With the Thrive Agenda, we would be able to create millions of good-paying jobs for hardworking people, restoring native prairies, cleaning our waterways, and fighting the climate crisis that we face today. That's a world where we can all thrive.
I am a climate activist from West Virginia who lived on a little farm in the northern panhandle. My life and my entire community were impacted by the corporate greed of the fossil fuel industry. I watched as our peaceful rural countryside was transformed into an industrial zone. Viable alternatives make this unacceptable for the future of our planet and our children. Congress needs to back the Thrive Agenda because no vaccine can be developed to combat the pandemic of corporate greed.
My name is Billy Camp. I work in the freight industry in Akron, Ohio. I've worked for this trucking company for 25 years. I've been able to support my family working a union freight job for those 25 years, for my kids and someday grandkids to have a safe and healthy world. We need to invest in making transportation a sustainable industry. I support the Thrive Agenda because we all deserve good jobs and a safe and healthy environment for the future. I am urging Congress and the Senate to do the same.
Debra Haaland again. Nice to see everybody. Thank you for holding strong for us here. I'd like to thank Pastor Banks, Sebastian, Chris, Christian, and Kaya for their powerful and important words. We're so happy that you all are here today. We appreciate all of your support. As a Pueblo woman and 35th generation New Mexican, I grew up with a culture that welcomes outsiders and shares what we have with them, one in which members of the Pueblo support each other in times of need. I learned to carry on the legacy of environmental stewardship of countless generations who came before me, who took seriously their responsibility to pass on our natural treasures and a livable planet to future generations. Sadly, that vision has not been shared by many of our countrymen and women. For generations, powerful elites have treated some communities as sacrifice zones and disposable, the dumping grounds for their extractive economy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this legacy of environmental racism has left frontline communities more susceptible to the disease and to the pandemic's economic impacts. In Louisiana, chemical plants and refineries have created a cancer alley that disproportionately affects the Black community. In Miami, immigrants and low-income residents are being displaced because of sea level rise due to climate change. Black and Hispanic families suffer from the highest levels of air pollution in the country in Detroit. And Native Americans in my own state of New Mexico have been exposed to methane from oil and gas drilling and radiation from uranium mining and nuclear weapons tests. Many of these folks don't have access to good health care or clean water and don't have the kinds of jobs where they can work from home. And they wouldn't have the internet to support that either. It all adds up to Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans making up a disproportionate share of COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations. As we look at how we're going to recover from these many crises, we must answer the question, are we going to continue with the status quo, or are we going to build a future where every community can thrive? The Thrive Agenda is our answer to that question. With the help from the Sunrise Movement, the Sierra Club, labor organizations like the Service Employees International Union and the Communication Workers of America, and groups seeking justice like Movement for Black Lives, Working Families Party, the Indigenous Environmental Network, and the Center for Popular Democracy, we came together to carve out a new path. Thrive lays out how we can make major investments in a way that targets the legacy of racial and economic injustice and takes on climate change, upgrade our broken infrastructure to expand access to clean and affordable water, transportation, energy, and high-speed broadband, and modernize and retrofit millions of homes, schools, and offices to cut pollution and costs. How we can create good, safe jobs that have strong labor standards, wages, and benefits, and where workers have the right to organize. We can protect our planet from the threat of climate change, and how we can ensure that recovery invests in frontline communities to counteract racial and gender injustice, that it empowers those communities and hires the people who live there, and that it ensures healthy lives for those who have borne the brunt of environmental racism and the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got over 70 original co-sponsors of the Thrive Agenda in the House because there's a broad agreement that this is how we should approach an urgently needed economic recovery moving forward, and I'm proud to be leading the charge. And I would now like to open it up for questions, not just for me, but any of the speakers who are here. Any of us would be happy to answer questions. So if anyone has any questions, please. I will turn it back to Kea to close. And thank you all again so much for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you to all our speakers. Today is a moment where from now moving forward, we've laid out what the agenda looks like and how we are going to recover from this crisis by tackling so many issues at once that have been holding us back. Thank you all for all of your remarks. And with that, I will close our session today. Thank you all.